Hanukkah Sameach. I'm Rabbi Jan Uhrbach, the interim Pearl Resnick Dean of the Rabbinical School here at JTS and director of the Bloch Holker Center for Spiritual Arts. And we're speaking of forgetting the Torah, curse or blessing. What do we pray on Hanukkah? In the days of Matityahu ben Yochanan, Hasmonean, the high priest, and in the days of his sons, when the cruel Greek kingdom rose to rule over your people Israel, demanding lahashkicham Toratecha, that they forget your Torah. This is from the Al-Hanisim, the special prayer inserted into the liturgy on Hanukkah. It says that the terrible thing that the Syrian Greeks tried to do to the Jews was make us forget the Torah. But they didn't succeed. This is the victory that we celebrate, not a military victory over a threat to our physical survival, but a spiritual intellectual victory in the face of threatened assimilation, forgetting and abandoning the Torah, our Judaism. That's the plain sense of the liturgy and really the central meaning of the holiday of Hanukkah. They tried to make us forget the Torah. We refuse to forget the Torah. Let's make latkes and eat. So it might surprise you to learn that a great 20th century Orthodox rabbi, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, known by the title of his published teachings, Pachad Yitzchak, sees this forgetting of the Torah and the victory very differently. And I want to thank Rabbi Ethan Tucker for pointing me to this text. In essence, Rav Hutner says, well, actually, we kind of did forget. But that's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. How so? How could forgetting the Torah be a good thing? And if we forgot, what exactly are we celebrating? So Rav Hutner begins by pointing to a rabbinic tradition that the very first sages to enter into a legal debate in the Mishnah, it happened to be a debate about festival offerings, were two sages named Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan. And these two sages lived precisely at the time that the Hanukkah story took place. And what this means is that rabbinic machlochet, debate, emerged just when the Greeks were trying to get us to forget the Torah. Before that, Torah was transmitted. Now it starts to be debated. In Rav Hutner's words, when the Greeks darkened the eyes of Israel with their decrees that Israel forget the Torah, we began to suffer from a darkness/forgetting. He's playing on the similarity of the words for forgetting and darkness. Hashchacha, forgetting. Chashecha, darkness. Because our eyes became dark and we forgot the Torah, we began to have disputes about the law. If we fully remembered it, well, there would be no debate. There would be no machloket. Now, we might be inclined to think, Hutner says, that all the debates in the Mishnah and the Talmud that continue until today are the negative after effects of this darkness forgetting. It's lasting damage caused by the Greek oppression. Yeah, we survived. We're still Jews, but we never fully recovered. Nope. That, he says, would be a superficial understanding. These debates aren't lasting damage. What they are is an example of how we turned darkness into light. Forgetting the Torah turned out to be a blessing in disguise, or at least the sages turned it into one. That's the miracle. Not just that we survived the Greek oppression and didn't fully assimilate, but that we took something from that negative experience and we turned it to the good. We turned darkness into light. You can see the resonance with Hanukkah and the image of lighting candles at the darkest time of the year. So now we have to ask, well, how so? How did we turn this forgetting into something good, the darkness into light? Well, Rav Hutner takes this forgetting of Torah caused by the Greek effort to make us assimilate, and he connects it with another moment of Israel forgetting the Torah. When Moses smashed the tablets after the sin of the golden calf. What do we know about that incident, that moment? Well, one thing, we learn in the Talmud, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, what is meant by engraved on the tablets, which the Torah speaks of. If the first tablets had not been shattered, the Jewish people never would have forgotten the Torah. Okay, so we stood at Sinai, we knew the whole Torah, but then we committed idolatry, we worshiped the golden calf, Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets, he saw the idolatry and he smashed the tablets. Eventually, Moses he made a second set of tablets, sure. But there was a price to smashing that first set. It made us vulnerable to forgetting the Torah. If that hadn't happened, we would have remembered everything. What a loss. How terrible. But we also learn in the Talmud, in a different Masechet, that was Masechet Eruvin, this is Menachot, in the name of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, sometimes the cancellation of Torah is its very foundation. As it is written, which you shattered, Asher Shibarta. The Holy Blessed One said to Moses, Yishar kochacha, Asher Shibarta. Good for you, well done, more power to you, that you shattered them. What's going on here? When God commands Moses to write the second set of tablets, God says, make the second set of tablets like the first Asher Shibarta, which you wrote. Which you broke. And the Midrash reads, God didn't say, which you broke, Asher Shibarta. God said, Yishar kochacha. Meaning, yes, Moses smashing the first set of tablets made us vulnerable to forgetting the Torah. But is that a bad thing? Seemingly not. When God tells Moses, carve a new set like the first ones, Asher Shibarta, which you shattered, what God was really saying was, good for you, Yasher Koach. This is what we say when someone has done a good job reading the Torah or an Aliyah, right? God says to Moses, Kol HaKavod, how great that you smashed the tablets. Keep it up. So if we put these two texts together, we have to conclude that there's something about forgetting the Torah that's good. Otherwise, why Yasher Koach to smashing the tablets and causing that forgetting? So what's good? What's good about forgetting the Torah? I'll give you Rav Hutner's answer, and then I want to expand a little bit into what he says and into my own. So Rav Hutner's answer is that the debates and disagreements about Torah actually expand and clarify the Torah. And in doing so, they create what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. We have the Torah Shebiktav, the written text, the written Torah, the Tanakh. That never changes. But then we have the oral Torah, all the discussion and interpretation and the in-depth analysis, which emerges only from debate, from forgetting. That's an ongoing unfolding and expansion. From those debates, we come to better understand the Torah. We come to better understand what God really wanted to convey at Sinai and what God is saying today. And also, at least as importantly, he says that we learn from this the principle that these and those are the words of the living God, Elu va'elu. Both sides of the debate, the majority opinion, the minority opinion, the one accepted and the one rejected, are both Torah. We may agree to follow one position, but they're both right in a certain sense. Wow. Rav Hutner is telling us that this notion of forgetting the Torah really speaks to the deepest nature of the whole Jewish enterprise, what we believe about revelation and discerning and striving to live according to the Word of God. Here's what I draw from it. 1, Judaism is fundamentally an anti-fundamentalist tradition. The point is not to memorize a fixed, unchanging text, frozen in time. For one thing, that would enable us to maintain the illusion that we human beings know the divine will for certain. That's a fantasy, and an arrogant one at that. We human beings, quote, forget. Our capacity to understand and internalize ultimate truths is limited. Forgetting is a blessing because it's a stance of humility, which is the only appropriate stance in relation to divine revelation. That's the first thing. The second is that God speaks, as it were, in dialectics, in irresolvable tensions, competing truths. Not one side or the other, but both and. It's similar to the famous quote by the great physicist Niels Bohr. It's one of my favorite quotes, although I don't know the exact quote. It's either something like, the opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth. Or some versions of it say, there are trivial truths and there are great truths. The opposite of a trivial truth is plainly false. The opposite of a great truth is also true. These and those are the words of the living God. So when it comes to trivial truths or facts, we need to be really good at distinguishing fact from fiction and lies and falsehood. But when it comes to ultimate truths, the Word of God, we need our debates and arguments to flesh out the contours of those competing truths, to remember that they are competing truths. If we only remembered, we'd have no space for that debate, that dialectic. Forgetting opens the door to discussion and dialogue. And it also means that we need each other. No one person remembers the whole Torah. We are all in the state of forgetting, and my truth is always and inevitably a partial truth. We need each other to access, to remember more of the whole. And we need what we call a bar plukta, a debate partner, someone who disagrees with us, Her Majesty's Royal Opposition, to debate with us so that we can flesh out those competing truths and better clarify our own understanding and beliefs. The fourth thing that I take from this amazing teaching by Rav Hutner is that the point of Judaism isn't knowing, it's learning, growing, evolving, transforming. Many of us are familiar with the text from the Talmud. It comes from Masechet Nida, taught in the name of Rabbi Simlai, that before we're born, we know the entire Torah. But the moment we're born into the world, an angel comes and touches us right here and causes us to forget the whole Torah. And that's why we have this little indentation. It's a beautiful text. It's very moving. But why? Why is it so beautiful? What moves us about it? One thing I think is that it teaches us that when we're learning Torah, it's not totally new to us. It's familiar. It's something we've always known and just forgot. We're remembering. But if the point is to know Torah, why bother with the forgetting? The point isn't to know, it's to engage in the process of learning, of acquiring and reacquiring, being transformed by what we learn, and in each generation, transforming the Torah. What does it mean to forget and remember? Contemporary cognitive science teaches us that the human mind actually doesn't work like the memory in our computers, where a file is stored and we can just retrieve it and open it intact and then save it again. Human memory is always transformative. Every time we retrieve a memory, we change it a little. We might say that remembering inevitably and always involves a little forgetting. And when it comes to Torah, that's not just a good thing, it's a fantastic thing. It's the point. A Torah that is never forgotten has a kind of static quality, a divine revelation that we could enduringly retain in its entirety, leaves no room for human thought and human partnership with God, human input. Forgetting opens the door to creative remembering, putting the pieces together in a new way, recreation of what we thought we knew. Forgetting creates that space for us to participate and partner. It's the path to a dynamic, evolving, living relationship with God. And here's the last point I want to draw from Rav Hutner's teaching about forgetting the Torah. We have in Jewish tradition a notion called Yeridat Hadorot, the descent of the generations. Basically, it's an idea that the further we get from Sinai in time, the more attenuated our memory, and the less accurate and true our understanding of Torah is likely to be. Each generation is a little less connected to the Sinai experience than the one before it. It's a conservative small c principle. Be careful about change. Preserve the past. Respect the sages of old. As a result, a later court, more recent generation of rabbis doesn't overrule an earlier court unless the later one is greater in both wisdom and number. It's sort of parallel to our notion of stare decisis. We respect the sages of old because they remembered more than we do, and forgetting is a problem. And that's a really valuable concept. It cautions us to be humble. Don't think that our generation is always and in every way more advanced and insightful and evolved and wise than our ancestors were. That's not true. A religious personality is not an adolescent, like that old joke that when I was a teenager, my parents were complete idiots who knew nothing. But as I got older, boy, they learned a lot. No. Jewish tradition calls out to us with ancient wisdom, timeless values and insights. that we do well to heed, to remember, to conserve. But Yeridat Hadorot is also a dangerous idea. It can keep us stuck, rigid, unable to respond to changing times. And perhaps more importantly, Yeridat Hadorot is a kind of depressing view of humankind. Like we're just always inevitably on this kind of downward trajectory, further and further from God and true wisdom, we decline. I don't believe that. I'm fundamentally an optimist about humanity. Human beings evolve. Our understanding of the world grows and deepens, and our moral and ethical sensitivities become more refined. We forget, and we also learn. And sometimes, some things we thought we knew, we do well to forget, to unlearn. We may be further from God and Sinai in some ways, but we are drawing ever closer in others. Is it a linear process of growth and evolution? Surely not. But I'm with Dr. King about the moral arc of the universe bending toward justice. So, Yeridat Hadorot, the descent of the generations, coexists with another classical rabbinic concept, more in line with everything I said earlier about Rav Hutner's teaching, the notion of continuing revelation. That teaches that everything that a serious student will ask their teacher, and the teacher will answer, was revealed to Moses at Sinai. All the discussions, the debates, the questions, the questing. This is really a way of claiming that the ongoing discussion that is oral Torah is Torah. Not just the written text, but all of it. All of the interpretation, the questions and the answers, that's Torah too. It's kind of the collective version of that lovely story about knowing the whole Torah before we're born and then forgetting it and re-remembering it over time. That was the individual. This is the whole Jewish people across space and time. At Sinai, the whole Torah was revealed. Everything. Some of it got written down. That's the text. And most of it sort of got forgotten, hidden away for future generations. And in every generation, we remember, we rediscover a little more. And it gets shaped and transformed and expanded and elevated through the unique experience and circumstance of each generation. This is the moment when this little piece of Torah could be re-understood, reintegrated, brought back into the tradition. And that's good. Not just good, that's the point. It's kind of like if you imagine Sinai was a collective dream that we all had. And I remember a piece, and you remember a piece, and as each one of us remembers that piece of that dream, we put the whole thing back together. So it's not just a descent from generation to generation. There's also an ascent from generation to generation. The Torah getting wider, more expansive, deeper, better understood, holier. I think we need both principles. Without Yeridat Hadorot, we'd become arrogant, rootless, susceptible to every passing fad and fancy. Sometimes Judaism has to stand counterculturally against the loss of core values, the erosion of principles, the erosion of identity, the threat of conformity and assimilation. We can't forget the Torah. But without continuing revelation, we become frozen in time, irrelevant and unresponsive, unable to learn and evolve and grow. New circumstances, scientific advancement, learning from other religious traditions and cultures, our continued study of our tradition reveals new aspects of Torah, sometimes moral and ethical demands within the Torah that we weren't until now able to understand or integrate. So sometimes Judaism itself needs to evolve in response to cultural change. And sometimes we begin to see that Jewish tradition calls us to lead the way in that change. Sometimes the cancellation of the Torah is its very foundation. In the days of Matityahu ben Yochanan, a Hasmonean, the high priest, and in the days of his sons, when the cruel Greek kingdom rose to rule over your people Israel, demanding that they forget your Torah, we turned darkness, forgetting, into light. We embraced the blessed space that forgetting creates and filled that space with creative debate, renewal, rededication, growth, change, moral courage, and ethical evolution. A cause for celebration, indeed. Chag Urim, the Festival of Lights. That's what we celebrate every day at JTS, and that's why I'm here. Our extraordinary students come to learn from our distinguished faculty, and our faculty learn from our extraordinary students every day. They bring the vast diversity of their experiences, their worldview, their insights, their beliefs into respectful dialogue and debate across all the generations of time and across the vast geographic diversity of the Jewish people. And through that process, we and our tradition evolve and grow, and the Torah expands. This is the essence of the Jewish enterprise, and what a precious rarity it is in our world today. It's essential. It's joyful. It is the miracle of Hanukkah. And it's why I really hope that you'll deepen your involvement with JTS. Come and learn. Add your Torah to the debate, the Torah you've forgotten, and we need you to remember. Add your voice, and we hope that you'll support us generously financially too. We need you. Chag Sameach. Have a joyful and beautiful, light-filled Hanukkah.